Hi, I'm David Chalmers. I'm Professor of Philosophy at New York University, and I work especially in the philosophy of mind and consciousness. One of the biggest issues in the philosophy of mind, and indeed in all of philosophy, is the debate between materialism and dualism. Materialism says everything in the world is physical. Everything is made of physics. The mind, in particular, is physical. Materialism goes back at least to the ancient Greek philosopher Democritus, who said everything is atoms in the void. Fundamentally, that's what reality is like. It's physics, physical particles, physical things. Materialism contrasts with dualism. Dualism says the world is both physical and mental. It has physical aspects, has mental aspects, and they're distinct from each other. Everything is physical or mental. In particular, the mind is non-physical. It's not reducible to something physical. The classic statement of this view was given by René Descartes in the 17th century. The mind and the body are distinct from each other and interact with each other. Descartes' form of dualism was substance dualism. It says there's two kinds of substance in the world, or better, two kinds of thing, two kinds of entity at the fundamental level. Substance dualism says the world contains both physical things and mental things. There are physical things like tables and chairs and bodies, and there are mental things like minds, people like us. Minds are non-physical things, not identical to bodies or to parts of bodies. Descartes said, I am essentially a thing that thinks. That is part of my nature as a human being. My body and any physical thing is not essentially a thing that thinks. Therefore, I am not my body, and I am not any physical thing. So that's substance dualism. Property dualism is a different form of dualism. It says there's really just one kind of thing in the world. There are just physical things in the world, atoms, bodies, chairs, and so on. But there are two kinds of property in the world, two different properties that things can have. There are mental properties like being conscious, or being happy, or being sad. And there are physical properties like being tall, or being heavy, or moving in a particular way. And mental properties and physical properties are distinct from each other. Some mental properties, like consciousness, cannot be reduced to physical properties, like, say, the firing of neurons in your brain. We may be physical things, but we still have irreducibly mental properties. A classic statement of property dualism was given by John Locke, who lived in the 17th and 18th centuries, said there could be thinking matter, physical things like bodies, but with the mental property of thinking. So it could be matter that thinks. This view is substance monist. There's just one thing here, but it has the property of thinking. It's a physical thing because it's matter, has a mental property because it thinks. Substance dualism is often taken to be very friendly with religious views of the world. For example, it's consistent with a soul, a non-physical entity that survives the death of our bodies. Property dualism is harder to reconcile with a soul, as it rejects any non-physical entities. So many people have thought that property dualism might be a view more in the spirit of science and less tied to a religious view of the world. In general, property dualism is often held to be more compatible with science than substance dualism. It's potentially a scientific form of dualism. Non-physical things like souls are harder for a scientific worldview to accommodate. But non-physical properties like consciousness may be easier to bring under the sway of science. In particular, many property dualists have argued that consciousness should be seen not as an aspect of a non-physical soul, but as a fundamental property of reality. Consciousness is a fundamental property, that is, a property not reducible to any more basic properties. This is a familiar idea in science. Science already postulates many fundamental properties: space and time and mass and charge and more. Physics gives a catalog of fundamental properties like this. And in physics, usually, these properties are not reducible to more basic properties. They're basic ingredients of reality. And it looks like any scientific worldview has to countenance some fundamental properties like space and time and mass and charge. So the thought is, maybe consciousness is like that, a fundamental property. These fundamental properties are governed by fundamental laws in physics. Those are quantum mechanics, the theory of relativity, and so on. These laws govern the universe by saying how all the fundamental properties in reality relate to each other. Sometimes in science, a phenomenon can't be explained by existing fundamental properties and laws. So in the 19th century, James Clerk Maxwell argued that electromagnetic phenomena couldn't be explained by the mechanics of the time growing out of Newton's laws of physics. Maxwell ended up introducing electric charge as a fundamental property of nature governed by his famous laws of electromagnetism as fundamental laws. Thus, charge was introduced as a fundamental property. So some property dualists argue that something similar goes for consciousness. Consciousness can't be explained by existing physical fundamental properties and laws. If that's right, we have an analogy with Maxwell. We need a new fundamental property. And one very natural proposal is that consciousness is itself such a property. Consciousness is a fundamental property of nature. Property dualism may then also invoke new fundamental laws involving consciousness. Maybe there'll be laws connecting certain physical properties of the brain to certain states of consciousness. Maybe there will certainly be correlations between physical properties and consciousness to be explained by fundamental laws, but those laws may have a status like fundamental laws of physics. Some property dualists think that consciousness may play some role in quantum physics, for example, in the quantum measurement process. There are a number of arguments for property dualism. There's the knowledge argument and the zombie argument, explored elsewhere in this course. Another central argument is the explanatory gap argument. It goes roughly like this. Physical properties cannot explain mental properties. For example, you can't explain why we're conscious in terms of properties of the brain. Second, if physical properties cannot explain mental properties, then mental properties are non-physical. And it concludes that mental properties are non-physical. Of course, both premises are controversial, especially the first, but this is one major motivation for the view. Property dualism gives rise to a number of objections. One major objection is, how can non-physical mental properties interact with physical properties? What's the connection between them that allows for interaction? Descartes' substance dualism had a big problem of interaction. How could a non-physical thing interact with physical things? But a version of this problem also arises for property dualism. One worry here is that physics seems to be a closed system, as standardly understood. Atoms affect other atoms, there are certain forces and certain fields. Everything that happens in physics is because of physics. There seems to be no room for mental properties to affect physical properties. And if that's right, then it can seem that property dualism leads to what philosophers call epiphenomenalism, the view that the mind has no effect on the physical world. Epiphenomenalism, at the very least, is counterintuitive. You're saying that my pain doesn't cause me to withdraw my hand from the flame? When I'm in pain, I sometimes say, ouch. I say, I'm in pain. Are you saying my pain doesn't cause me to say I'm in pain? So for these reasons, it's at least taken to be counterintuitive, and many philosophers think best avoided. The alternative is interactionism, which is mental properties have some effect on physical properties. Physics is not a closed system because mental properties can affect it. The non-physical properties of the mind affect the brain, and somehow non-physical mental properties like consciousness affect physics. Then the question is, can this interaction be reconciled with science? Some people think that consciousness can have an effect on physics in quantum mechanics through the so-called collapse of the wave function. When a conscious mind makes a measurement of a physical system, that physical system takes on a definite state. That's one proposal for how mental properties might be able to have some effect on physical properties in the physical world, but it's very controversial.